We begin this week with the coverage of an underreported conflict. India has 700,000 troops in Kashmir. That's more than 5 times the size of coalition forces in Afghanistan. Yet the story attracts just a fraction of the coverage. For the media on both sides of the Indian-Pakistani border, Kashmir is a huge story. For the last 3 months, there's been unrest on the Indian side and evidence of blind spots and biases in Indian news coverage. Too often, analysts say, the telling of a story that requires nuance and room for different voices to be heard has been dominated by talk of security concerns in a power struggle over Kashmir that has lasted 63 years and already caused 3 wars. Our starting point this week is the disputed territory that lies between 2 nuclear powers, Pakistan and India. The Listening Post's Jason Mohican now on a story that fails to get proper coverage in India and fails to get sufficient coverage in the rest of the media world.
Trouble erupted in Srinagar once again when protesters clashed with police.
It's a mass uprising and youngsters coming out on the streets demanding azadi or freedom.
The cyclic violence in Kashmir.
India would say that they are quite fair in their reporting. But people here in Kashmir say that there is very much a pro-government bias.
Kashmir is a very, very good example of how overwhelmingly important the media coverage of any kind of political crisis has become.
If there are some people who do
especially when the political crisis in question is the one in Kashmir. For media on the Indian subcontinent, the story of this disputed territory is fraught, the telling of it even more so.
I think in India, unfortunately, the media has always been guided about Kashmir by the terms that are set for it by the state.
All over Srinagar, there is complete curfew.
The mainstream corporate media in India is totally unable to distance itself from the point of view of the government.
Well, the fact is that nationalism does sell, so Indian media, Indian newspapers and channels do have somewhat of a pro-government slant. And there's also a lot of emphasis on cross-border terrorism, because once again, terrorism or the fear of terrorism is a magnet for viewers and readers.
Kashmir remains hostage, as it were, to the exigencies of a largely nationalistic media.
Is the army still needed to govern Kashmir?
Which gives overriding importance to the paradigms of national security and nationhood, and seeks to subsume even the small amount of space that Kashmiris have been given to articulate their desires and aspirations.
Whoever is reporting from the ground is reporting to desk editors in New Delhi. And I think that those filters tend to be very conservative. They are constantly filtering out information, news, stories which are not comfortable for the sort of Indian nationalist position.
That's been the case for a while, and it's been especially evident in the reporting of this most recent flare-up in Kashmir. The Indian media finds it hard enough to report on a military campaign that's not going well. Add to that the news of crimes by Indian soldiers, and it makes the story tougher to cover. Local Kashmiri papers do cover these events, but the stories don't often make it out of India-administered Kashmir to Delhi, Mumbai, or Bangalore.
I mean, there are scores of Kashmiri journalists now who ritually make sure that each death, each killing, each rape, each act of violence doesn't go unreported. But it has limited reach. It doesn't really permeate into the Indian mainland, if I can call it that. And the national media selectively picks or ignores news and events coming from Kashmir.
Reporting by Indian national media is subject to self-censorship. In Kashmir, local reporting has been stifled by the conditions imposed by the armed forces. One newspaper, Greater Kashmir, was off the streets for a whole week.
Well, if you ask people here, they say that the Indian government does control the media very much here. Now, according to Reporters Without Borders, they say that local journalism has been hugely affected by the very strict curfew in place, mainly because journalists cannot get to their place of work, cannot get around to report.
The journalists in Kashmir are under tremendous pressure from the state authorities. They are not able to move out, they are not able to discharge their duties properly. And why they are doing it is perhaps because they don't want the journalists to cover the incidents of human rights violations at the hands of police and paramilitary forces.
With local media being squeezed, Kashmiris, like so many protesters elsewhere, have taken their fight online.
Well, the fact that the internet is up and running is a problem for the authorities here because people have been using the internet to pass on messages and footage. Many protesters have been using their mobile phones to capture images of the security forces clamped down on the protesters. They've also been posting pictures of mothers crying and pictures of people at funerals and the rage which has been passed out and people have easy access to over Facebook and other networking sites.
The internet users have been regularly discussing and debating issues on Facebook, the different issues pertaining to Kashmir crisis, the human rights violations. And of late what has happened is that the users have also started uploading different kinds of videos about the happenings around on YouTube as well.
What is happening on the ground is that a whole lot of young people are on the street throwing stones, but there is also a bunch of people on the other side who are on the net, and they are kind of providing a context for what's going on.
And for Kashmiris, their online presence is especially important given how low they are on the global media's radar. Theirs is a story that's over 60 years old, but international media has given it a pass.
Kashmir is a great suppression story. I mean, given the fact of it being a recognized international dispute, these two countries having fought wars over it, the sheer scale of the violence that has happened. It's incredible to even think about this has largely been so ignored or so marginalized or so misrepresented so far.
But Kashmiris are determined not to be frozen out by the mainstream media.
I think that the net, the Facebook and the social networking sites are constantly being able to puncture the mainstream narrative in quite interesting ways. The kinds of claims that are made about what's happening in Kashmir are very quickly punctured on the other side.
It's almost as if the Intifada has shifted from Palestine to Kashmir, and that's what's getting some people's attention. The mere spectacle of the age range of the boys who have been killed recently is between 7 years and 26 years. These images and the continuing protests against these killings is what has caused a little bit of renewed attention in Kashmir.
But attention is one thing. What the Kashmir story needs is context. And until media in India, Pakistan, and around the world create room for nuance in their coverage, Kashmir will continue to be misunderstood.
Our Global Village voice is now on Kashmir and the media.
The media in Kashmir is almost non-existent. There has been a ban imposed by the government of Kashmir on reporting. Now, in such a scenario, the new media like the Facebook, the Twitter, the YouTube have been instrumental in making the world aware of the current scenario, the situation and the atrocities that are faced by the local youth or the local population.
Kashmir is big news in India at the moment, streaming headlines and television debate panels. Though there is some sort of effort being made by newspapers and magazines, some of them at least, to portray a diversity or a plurality in voices, most daily reportage, especially on television, is confined to government statements, number of deaths, and the Kashmiri voice being that of the separatists.
Indian media is reporting the issue in a very biased manner, keeping in view their own interests and agenda. And the international media is reporting the issue in a very unprofessional manner, which indicates that not a proper research has been done about the Kashmir issue by such channels.